This is segment 4. This is Tom Harris. I'm director of the University Center for Economic Development. And for part of our activities in the University Center for Economic Development, we're also part of Nevada Cooperative Extension. And one of the programs is the Risk Management Agency program. Mike Helmer is here. Mike is part of the University Center for Economic Development and also with the Food and Ag Policy Research Institute. Mike, this session, Mike will be addressing dairy issues. If you look last week in the Wall Street, there was an article talking about farmers nationally dumping milk. That hadn't happened since the 1960s. So dairy has had a very up and down, volatile type of economic volatility. And it should be of interest because dairy is something that we're looking at expanding here in the state. So, Mike, can you give us some insights to what's going on in the dairy sector and maybe some forecasts, what people are forecasting in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, well, right now, and one of the reasons, I think it was 43 million pounds of milk were dumped last week. That's a response to, if we take a look at this first chart, if you look at both lines, the red and the blue line, there's actually 3 lines on there. A couple of them run together most of the time. But we can see that in 2015, those are milk prices, that the milk prices crashed. Yeah. They'd been very high before that. They crashed. Now, part of that reason was feed costs dropped and all that. But in 2016, they receded even further. And we have a lot of dairy producers around the country, particularly if they didn't buy into the margin protection plan, or at least at higher rates, are losing some money, and so they're dumping the milk. It costs them less to lose the milk than to get a low price plus pay transportation costs to wherever it's going. True. So they are dumping.
Even with gas
milk.
Prices declining, that's even that. Too.
Yeah, and transportation costs, are part of that to getting there, but it's also, you got to rent the truck fleet, and you've got to pay drivers and things. Things of that.
There's a whole economics on that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. But as we started out with, national milk prices and of course state prices following that just fell precipitously last year in 2015 and are down a little bit more yet this year. And again, part of that is that feed costs, at least nationally, declined a lot. We saw a big drop in our corn prices, saw a big drop in our protein meal prices like soybean meal, and hay prices nationally fell quite a bit. So those milk prices did drop. Now, we can say that and talk about a national average, but it's a little different in Nevada. We have a little different feed ration, and it may not have dropped quite as much. But even so, it did still drop. We saw the hay prices that we talked about earlier. And now, but we expect to see them come back a little bit, but not reach the areas that we saw back in 2014. Nowhere near that. So they'll come back over time. But dairy farmers are not going to be awash in cash over the next few years. It's going to be kind of a tough road to hoe for
tough margins.
Yeah, the margins are going to go down. And so this is the time to talk about this chart. This is a chart that shows the milk price. This is the national milk price, and the MPP, the Margin Protection Plan, calculated feed cost on there. And so you can see that we've got quite a bit. We've got $7 to $8 or maybe $9 worth of margin in there between the milk price per hundredweight and the equivalent feed cost per hundredweight of production milk. So those feed costs are going to be down. But what that means is that if a producer just took the free $4 protection limit,
right, which
the USDA offers, and that's free, he's not going to get a payment. He's going to operate completely on his local market. If you go up, and you can go up to $8 coverage, but you pay money as that goes up. True. Those guys at $8, there are going to be some months, and it's not just an annual average, but 2 months worth of averages at a time. Some people are going to get some payments, but you've got to pay into that much higher level.
You've got to pay a premium to get there.
You've got to pay a premium to get there. So basically the point of this is that for the most part, nationally and in Nevada as well, dairy is going to operate off the market. It's going to be a completely market-oriented industry. So we looked at those low milk prices, and I kind of want to switch a little bit now here to talk about herd expansion in Nevada. Hard to expand herds when you have low milk prices and low profitability. But we've got the whole milk powder plant that went into operation a couple of years ago in Fallon that provided a huge market for Nevada producers. And the goal is to eventually have local northern Nevada producers feed that 2 million pounds a day that milk plant will take of liquid milk, fluid milk. And this is not necessarily a projection of what will happen, although it's kind of what it will require to meet that. And what it is that if we look on the left side, and that goes with the blue line, that's the head of dairy cows in Nevada. And it will be from 2015 or 2014 until we reach capacity. If we supply all the milk in this state, it's going to be about 16,000 head increase, which is about doubling the northern Nevada herd. We'll have to double. And as you can see, the bottom of the red line is just that equivalent in terms of milk production. That will follow right along with the number of dairy cows. In order to expand the herd like that, it's going to take some economic incentives or some really forward-looking dairymen, given the particular environment that we're in right now. We've seen anecdotally that there've been a few expansions of a few thousand head, particularly in Churchill County, but it hasn't expanded like we had hoped. Again, they're running into those economic headwinds, and they're still being constrained by water availability. To run a dairy, it takes water. To grow the feed, it takes water. So we still have those headwinds in front of us. But we have some forward-looking dairy producers in this state who are looking beyond, I believe, it appears that that's what they're doing, looking beyond the current economic environment, and they're big. And larger dairies can go with a smaller margin. They make it up in volume. And so they're forward-looking.
Economies of scale.
Economies of scale. They're looking beyond low profits right now, trying to make that up in volume, and they're looking forward to a time when the profits will be better, and they'll be set to really supply that plant.
Yeah.
But here's the question we just kind of hit on a little bit. Can lower profitability drive the expansion? I guess what I really want to ask is, can the economic incentives, can lower profitability, or can profitability itself drive the expansion? And here we look at the cost. This is looking at costs of dairy production in terms of milk per hundredweight of milk. That's 100 pounds of milk sold, and then the black line is the gross value of production. Now, this doesn't include just milk production, but this includes sale of calves and sale of cull cows and even heifers if the rancher decides not to breed them. So that all that's in there, but it's primarily milk. Milk production. So you can see that the top of that line where it peaks up, the black line peaks up with a good gap above the bar, was in 2014. It was a good year for dairy producers. We had high milk prices, over $20 per hundredweight. Substantially over $20 per hundredweight, and even though we're in a high price environment, the milk prices were enough to offset that,
those prices,
and that was a good year for dairy. We hit 2015, costs go down, but milk prices really dropped, and we can see that profitability disappeared. In fact, there's some dairy producers that took losses last year. Now we expect to see that once we get all the data in for this year in 2016, that profitability won't be negative, but it's going to be very, very small. And with the milk prices that we have in front of us, and the costs, even though they're relatively, benign increases over the time, those milk prices are going to stay low enough that it's not going to see profitability return to the dairy sector anytime soon. At least not real great profitability that you would think of in terms of being needed to induce the dairy expansion. So it's going to be a difficult time to expand our herds in Nevada. So they're just showing here that we've got producers that say they're going to do it. They're starting to do it, but economically it's going to be tough for them.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess your next slide is very interesting. In this is the battling the competition with the foreign competitors, and as well as the strong dollar, which makes us less competitive, really.
Yeah, it does. And as you can see from these lines, and these are just some of the different major products that we have. We have non-fat dry milk on the bottom, cheese, whey, butter, which is very, very small, and then there's other dairy products out there that we export. That through about 2014, we did very well in terms of dairy exports around the world. In 2015, 2014 is the time when we really saw the dollar begin to get strong, and so more so in 2015, and we started seeing that our products become very expensive in foreign markets. And when it comes to dairy exports and dairy production, we're not the big dog in the fight.
No.
And particularly with a lot of the markets that we export to, and the Asian markets, the growing markets, New Zealand is the big dog in the fight. They've got a dairy industry that's very low cost. It's almost completely grass-fed, grazing-based. They've got some very, very modern processing facilities that really cuts their production costs, and they're extremely competitive. Additionally, in that Asian market, they're just located right there in it.
Right there.
And so they started to beat us up a little bit last year. And again, I did with this, you can see that I've got the first 6 months of 2015 compared to 2016. The New Zealanders are actually beating us even more so this year in those markets than they were last year. And there's something else going on there too that we'll get to in a minute. But right now, we're kind of getting beat up in global dairy markets.
Okay.
Regardless, if we just want to look at some basic economics in terms of whole milk powder production, and this is important for our Fallon plant, if we take a look at the blue line is a whole milk powder price. It's a projection of the whole milk powder price, a global price. This is in the Pacific region, Pacific region, compared to the Class 3A milk price, and its Class 3A milk is what's being used to make the milk powder.
Milk powder price.
Yeah, it's not the Class 1, but it's a Class 3A. If we take a look at that, and if we take that Class 3A milk price and put it on a pound for pound equivalent for whole milk powder, we can see that there is quite a gap between the two, and that there is some profitability, probably 40 cents a pound or 35 cents a pound, just between the milk price and the whole milk powder price. So it shows that there's good potential for profitability for our processing plant in Fallon. I just want to make sure that we understand one thing here. This is the gap between the milk price and the input price and the output price, the whole milk powder price. It does not include labor costs, other plant operating costs, and things of that nature. So that margin is actually lower than that. But just that gap between the milk price and that powder price is looks like it's going to be maintained.
Okay.
So that there will be some profits there that will support that plant, providing, and here's the big provision, we have the market. And that has developed into an issue lately.
Okay.
And here's the issue. Our target market for that plant is supposed to be 85 or 90% of the output from that plant is destined for China. China is going to use it like you and I would use milk out of a milk carton at our dinner table. Their fluid milk has some quality issues and some health issues and some contamination issues. Whereas this milk, they take that whole milk powder and they just reconstitute it. They just mix it with water and set it right there on the table. It's what they drink. It's what their kids drink. That's the market that we're looking at. However, the major exporter in the world for whole milk powder, and they're very efficient at it, and they've got a locational advantage, is again New Zealand.
New Zealand.
Now, if we go back to 2000 and 2013 and into 2014, we see a big uptick in U.S. exports of whole milk powder to China. And we see, and this is at the time, 2014 is when our plant was coming online. And we looked at it and says, this is great, we're off and running. Well, a couple of things happened in that year. one of those things was that the New Zealand plant had some issue. It's one of the major
Yes.
New Zealand plant had some
Yeah.
issues and had to shut down for a while.
Yes.
We picked up a lot of that.
In fact, what happened, the New Zealand currency dropped $2 because of that. That's
Yeah.
how interdependent that whole
Yeah.
New Zealand dry milk powder is to the New Zealand economy.
Yeah, and so it just put a big gap into what China was buying, and so they turned to the U.S. We're on the West Coast. Our milk powder plant, it gets shipped through the port of Oakland. Boy, it was just like we filled right into that gap, and we thought we're off and running. New Zealand came back. They're an established supplier for the Chinese. The Chinese like established suppliers. They went back to New Zealand, and on top of that, China had bought some extra milk powder to build some stocks.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of got out of that game. So what happened as we get into 2015 is we've pretty much lost a lot of that market, and we need to build that market back. So the issue is to convince the Chinese to drink more fluid milk that they import,
Mm-hmm.
and that goes beyond the capacity of what New Zealand can supply them. We will fall in line as the next supplier. They've already seen us. They like us. We can come back into that market.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's
About it.
that's
Okay.
about it.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike. That's the end of the podcast. This is on dairy, and again, this is for educational uses, not financial recommendations. And if you have any comments on the podcast, there's areas for you to make comments, and we can continue this discussion. I hope you enjoyed these podcasts and kind of learned about what's going on with Nevada agriculture and potential Nevada ag prices in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.